everybody.
Hello.
Hello. So it's the three of us again.
Yeah. It's easier to agree. Diego, are you from the Python SDK?
Hello, good morning.
Yes.
Hello, Ludmila.
Yes, I work for the Python project for Telemetry.
Yeah, I've seen the name. Now I see the face as well.
Cool. It sounds like the Johannes is out. Clemens won't be joining. Michael is out, so we are alone here.
Yeah, I think Ted is on vacation as well. So is there a plan for this meeting?
I think Johannes left us some agenda to discuss. So maybe I can share my screen. Yep. Cool. So what he suggests is to, this is just a general OTAP, right? So I think he wanted us to talk about current discussions. I'm kind of curious, like we can discuss. I briefly looked into the separation between the create and publish stages. And it seems Christian is not here, right? So do we have any suggestion, like anyone who is interested in keeping them together, or do we just want to get some understanding what's there, why they should be separate, what do folks want to do, or maybe you want to discuss something else?
I want to ask about the process. How do we agree on something? Do we discuss it here, and then if we have a consensus, then we can decide that we want to add it to the spec? I'm not very familiar with the process. So if somebody can elaborate on it.
I wish I could.
Well, I would say from my experience that is probably the process, but I'm not sure we have enough people here that are involved to have that consensus today.
Yep.
So what are your opinions if there's the five of us about adding create span, per message create span? Like, I wrote my opinion on the OTAP, and I didn't see other people participate. So I'd love to hear other opinions, or if you don't have an opinion, it's okay as well.
So I'm just trying to skim it. So is it that Christian is saying that we shouldn't have a create span because it's not a networking concern, and your argument is that yes, we should? Is that right, in summary?
Yeah, I think.
Go, Ludmila.
Yes, sorry, you go. you had a
No, no.
better opinion there. Yeah, I think this is one of the things that we would have to decide in this working group, that even though it's not a network call, but the context it has is unique per message. And if we have a bunch of messages, each message has a unique context, but they are transported together, right? Or maybe they are created in one context, buffered in memory, and sent from the other thread, right? So they have to carry the context, but how we and if they carry a context, it should be a unique one, which means a new span. So we either stay within the current boundaries of OpenTelemetry and create a span per message, or we invent something new, and even though it's not a network call, we record it somehow else.
Yeah, so you're saying that it is possible that we'll have multiple traces that are grouped together into one send operation, and we have to keep like the context of the message for the propagation, right?
Yeah.
Right.
I agree with you about it. I think it's the right way to go. It's the current situation as it appears in the spec causes a lot of issues, like real world issues, which I wrote about on this OTEP.
Yeah, thank you. I think this part's right.
Yeah.
I'm just thinking, I think for the stuff I've done to date, at any rate, I've treated create and publishing as one span, but that's also because we haven't had the ability to batch the actual publishing to a broker aspect. It's always been one and one. So they were indistinguishable from that perspective. But I certainly agree that if there's the ability to batch a group of messages and send them to a broker at once, that is the publish step. So it makes sense to have a separate create step so that you can have that distinguishable context for each message.
By the way, if we're touching this issue, then on the processing side, at least
Sorry, Amir, I cannot hear you. Is it just me?
I hope, but if it,
No, he's breaking up for me as well.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
sorry about that, it's probably my internet. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. Can you repeat?
Yeah, just want to open the specification to make sure that I'm saying correct things. So I think that regarding the batching, but actually it's a different topic. Maybe I'll open it when we talk about batching. So never mind for now.
Okay,
I have a
I'm
question.
oh, sorry, go ahead.
There's is the separate create only needed for batching, or would we then need that for the simpler scenarios also?
Like when we worked with our messaging SDKs, what we thought that first, let's say you have a network issue and you have a retry on your publish operation. Do you want to update the message? I don't think so. So like you can have multiple retries, but still one message created, right? And then there is a question how we represent retries. We don't have an answer as well, right? So also, like, I think for the backends, wouldn't it be easier for the tracing backends to have the one scenario, not that sometimes they are merged together and sometimes they are separate, but have just the simpler logic?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. if we have the ability to do batching and need to separate, create, and publish, I think it makes sense to do it for everything and not just for particular scenarios. And as you say, we may end up finding that retries are implemented as multiple spans, and therefore we need that ability to like hang them off of this was tried to publish many times and things like that. It would look very weird to have a incoming span potentially into something that then produces messages and then have a whole bunch of other retry spans and then a real one. And it's a little obtuse looking at that as to what's caused that to happen without something in front of it that says, oh, I'm trying to create something.
Yeah, agreed.
Unfortunately, though, I think without Christian here, we're not going to be able to reach a resolution to that.
Now we can write a summary and we can ask him to comment. I heard a lot of discussions and a lot of arguments around that. We kind of already have instrumentation and they kind of work already. Do we want to talk about any kind of backward compatibility with them?
For the Java, for the Java instrumentation that we have, I mean, we've kind of all known that the messaging semantic conventions were still in flux, and it hasn't really even been clear for, we've had lots of discussions internally among the Java instrumenters, how to even interpret the specs. So we know that what we have today is just sort of a best effort. And I don't, at least in that group, I don't think there's any issue with changing.
Okay.
I tend to agree. I think we should do what right and implement it without regards to what we currently have, because we all agree that the current spec has many issues that are very problematic.
And there was a previous discussion like around earlier this year when the SDKs were starting to go 1.0. There was discussion around telemetry stability guarantees, and we were told explicitly by the open telemetry community to not declare stability of any telemetry until those backward compatibility telemetry guarantees discussions were resolved, which, as far as I know, still hasn't occurred.
Right. I think it's well documented somewhere here. Yeah. So basically, yeah.
I think it's a non-issue.
Okay. Cool. Great. So then it seems we are kind of in consensus within this small group that we probably want to separate our creation and publishing, right? So this the first discussion. So I'll try to document what we discovered, and I'll ping Christian to comment on this.
Okay.
Okay, so what else Johannes left us? Or do you want to work on something else? It's just Johannes drives this effort, and I thought that he has some plan in mind and we can follow up. Otherwise, I'm happy to talk about anything else.
I have something that I want to talk about, if it's okay with you. I implemented the AWS SQS instrumentation in Node, and like every week I get people writing me, opening issues, saying that the messaging on SQS doesn't work. because SQS by default is doing batch receive. And according to the specification, it's very, where it's opening a new trace for the receive. So if somebody sends a message into SQS, and on the other side,
Oh. I'm sorry, Amir, you're dropping again.
so
Sorry, we couldn't hear you. I think it's not just me.
yeah, I think my internet is not stable today. Maybe I'll wait for next week to discuss it. Yeah.
I was curious where you were going, if you don't mind picking up from, you were right when you were breaking up, you were saying that the SQS by default batch receives. And so something about the spec saying to start a new trace, and I'm guessing that users were complaining that traces were broken.
Yeah, it's like never ending. It's every week someone else saying your instrumentation doesn't work. Like it follows the spec, but it goes against what people expect the traces to be. So if they send a message and the message is received on the other end, so people are expecting it to be one trace. So they like have a single trace and they can see the operations in a single logical flow. But current specification states that when we're doing batch receive, then we should open a new trace for the receive. And I completely understand why, but I think it's a very problematic issue. At least my feedback from people is that it goes against what they expect to see. So I want to ask about your opinions, if you have a similar experience, if you have thoughts about how to make it easier for consumers to use the traces.
I think in Azure SDK, we decided that even if we receive a batch, but we don't follow the current conventions, I'm sorry. But we decided that if we receive a batch, but there is a one message, we still continue a trace because this is easier. And I think this is because of the current state of all the tracing backends that don't support links well. And assuming they did, that for the customers, there will be much less difference between if it's a single trace or it's a multiple traces. This is my 2 cents.
So it's only if it's a single message. If you batch receive multiple messages, but then you process them one by one, then for this flow, you're still creating a different trace on the receive, right?
And for the instrumentation and SDK, we don't know what happens besides our API, right? So besides the SDK API. So if user receives a batch, when they write their for loop, we cannot instrument it. So we can tell users how to instrument them. And we can provide, like I tried to do it with our current instrumentations. And like what we can provide on top of OpenTelemetry is easier ways for user to extract the context from the message. Maybe SDK should provide some APIs, maybe instrumentation package should provide this convenience method to extract. But I think this is we can leave it beyond this current specification discussions. It can be added on top. But basically, we have to create a new trace because we have 10 different messages. Which one would we pick? And then we work with the backends would eventually support it, right? But before that, we can tell users what to do to trace individual. This is my opinion.
So you're saying that you do a batch receive, you get back let's say 10 messages, and then the user has to iterate over those messages, and you're not even able to create the processing spans and understand the context of downstream operations.
Right. So in case we have some handler APIs, some many many messaging SDKs allow you to have a handler per message. And in this case, we are able to instrument single messages. But if it's just a batch receive, or if this is a batch receive handler, then we just do our best effort here.
What I done the way for people like can you hear me? Yeah.
Give it another try.
Or if internet, so to give it another try. So what I did in SQS is I patched the mapping for each functions on the array, and that way I can extract the right context. But this is like a very specific solutions. But I agree that there's a problem here that we should probably think how the trace will look in these situations.
And the problem here is that not it's just that we want, if we knew we always want to have single message processing, it would be easier, but we don't know, right? So let's say you take 100 messages of this, I don't know, temperature information, and you aggregate it and you create an average thing. You don't want to trace individual messages, or it's too expensive for you. So it's just, we don't know. It seems like it's a user responsibility. It's their application logic.
Yeah, I agree. It is a problem, but I think that if a user is batch receiving 100 messages, and then let's say for each message is doing a DB operation, so at the end, it just gets like 100 DB operations without any context of what causes this operation to be initiated. So if he has like he knows, okay, I'm processing a message, and because of the processing of this message, I'm accessing the DB, then everything is much more organized. But there's a like technical issue of how to tell that this is the situation.
Yeah, I think like I think about the developer flows, right? They try upon telemetry, they instrument the library, they see, okay, I received 100 of messages, and now I have 100 DB operations together. So let me see how I can separate them. And they go, and let's say in Java, they discover this span annotation. And assuming they can put the right context there, or maybe we provide some examples to them, they just go and discover, okay, I just wrap my function with this annotation and I'm done. And now it's perfect, right? So it's not one step for developer to just take the instrumentation. And it's not like how we want it to be. And if we have a solution, I'm happy to prototype it.
Unfortunately, I don't have a solution. I have to say that on my side, my experience is that people, they don't go so deep. They install whatever is on the market, like whatever they find in the registry, and then they look at the trace. And if it doesn't look good, they're just disappointed. They're not making any effort to change their code or to add things. Like many of the consumers, they use vendors that or require an SDK, and they don't want, or they don't have the energy or the will to start instrumenting their own code specifically. So I think it's going to be an issue, at least on the feedback that I'm getting from our users, which are very confused. And so I just want to hear if you have opinions about it, but I think we all agree that it's a difficult situation to handle.
Maybe this would could be, because that makes a lot of sense. As a default, you want users to get that, nice behavior, what looks nice in most cases and in most backends. And to Ludmila's earlier point about backend support of links, but having that be a configuration option to use links, and instead of parenting in that way, which I think is the better long-term solution, is the links, because like the batch, like if somebody is doing something like in a batch, say they have a scheduled job, and in that, once an hour they pull down a bunch of messages and process them. It's still nice for the normal parent context to flow. So the scheduled job to be the parent of the batch receive, and to be the parent of the processing of each individual message. And then have each individual processing of the message have a link to the producer of that message. That feels like a better modeling theoretically, but not today in practice because of backend support.
And also, it sounds like if we use parent-child relationship when it makes sense today, it would not be a breaking change to switch to links in future when backend supported widely, and having a configuration option now. I don't think what bad could happen from it.
I mean, I guess the only question there is if we do have a telemetry stability guarantee at some point, after that, we probably can't flip the default behavior, the default configuration option.
I think when we talk about telemetry stability, we mostly talk about things like attributes. But like if you have a span with the right parent, or if we have a span with a link, it's kind of beyond. You have to support it either way, unless some exporters or backends rely on very specific thing, right? Which also could happen. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I think of the telemetry stability in terms of like if people have set up alerts on certain things, and I could see possibly, I mean, it's not going to break many people, so I'm not hugely concerned about it, but I think that is a goal in the community, is to have that strict telemetry stability at some point.
Can we just document it in the spec and say, okay, you can have a direct parent if you have one message?
I can take the task of document the various situations, and so we can have like a baseline to discuss maybe in future meetings, if you want, because I think it's more complex than that, because there's a lot of combinations of how you do receive and processing that are possible, and I'm willing to document it.
Cool.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Cool, so I'll do it for next week.
Nice. Other things to discuss, or should we go with the plan? I think it's like my opinion, it's better to discuss whatever questions this group has.
Do you want to discuss something?
No, I don't have anything in mind. Okay. Then I think it kind of makes sense to talk about these items, even though we don't have the enough people to build the community-wide consensus. At least we can understand each other better. And next time it will be easier for us to talk about something. What do you think?
Yeah, I love that.
Sounds good.
Cool. And I'm going to publish the notes later. It's just hard for me to hear and talk and also to write, but I remember. So okay, then the next thing on our list is in-memory queues and channels. I think we put it out of scope in this spec because it sounds like it's still this asynchronous pattern, but all the attributes we will put, the information we would need, all the logic about the retries, the span creation, which spans you create, it's just too different. So I think we decided to keep, where is that? Anyway, we decided to keep them out of scope. So
I guess my question is, why would they be different? Because you're still producing and consuming messages, they're just not going through a broker.
right, so there is no spans to publish and receive, right? There is the span to create and span to process.
Well, you're publishing, it's just publishing to an internal channel that isn't a network. Because we do that with Quarkus by creating reactive streams to stream them all together. So they are essentially being published. It's just that it's published to an internal, I can't remember there might be a Netty channel internally, I can't remember exactly. But it's still being published to a channel. It's just that it doesn't then get written to a broker.
Do you want to create spans for this?
We do today with Quarkus, yes. Simply because there could be many hops internally as well as additional hops externally. And it's important to know exactly what an application is doing in terms of particularly event streaming and the like.
Okay. And do you feel that, let's say we create the specification for mostly messaging systems, and perhaps the big part of it would be which attributes you put for this system and that system. Would you feel the same specification would be applicable?
I think for the most part, yes. It might just be that I'm trying to think off the top of my head, the current conventions. I think it would mostly be like when it talks about a broker, and the examples are currently like Kafka and RabbitMQ and stuff like that. Currently, there wouldn't be a value for that. Now, whether that means that needs to be an optional field or whether it's still required and we add an option for like internal or something to indicate that it's not going through a broker. But I think most of the stuff is still applicable.
Okay, and then when we have, let's say, the specification where we say this is applicable if it's not the in-memory queue or channel, and then this is optional but if you have a broker, then you have to put it. It sounds to me that, like, let me give you an example. I have a team of developers who work on SDKs and they don't have any knowledge about tracing, very little. So when I give them spec like that, they don't understand it. They need my help to parse it. And I want to eliminate myself in the process and write the spec that people who are not very deep into tracing can understand. So some clarity around this, it really bothers me. And I'm not opposed to this thing. It's just the general impression. So maybe we should just write it in some different way to make it clear.
Okay.
Yeah.
What exactly are we talking about with in-memory queues? I mean, is this something that real like messaging queues, or is this just like, say, any kind of queue that I throw things into locally and pull from?
So I get. So I guess, yeah, the use of queue there might be a bit of a misnomer. It's more applicable to channels, where you will often, as instead of having direct calls between methods, you'll chain a different execution together with, in what we have in Quarkus, we call it like outgoing methods that produce messages and incoming ones that receive them. So you can chain these together into a sequence, and you can broadcast so that the same message can be sent to multiple methods and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of a way to separate the code into more discrete chunks without doing direct function calls, while still supporting like reactive streams and async programming and all that kind of stuff.
So is it mostly, what is the observability of that? Is it most, like, I'm trying to think what we're doing in the Java instrumentation around like reactive stuff, is mostly just around propagating the context, not creating spans.
No, we actually, well, with Quarkus, we create spans as well. So you can see each hop is a separate span.
How noisy is
that? Granted, I haven't done it with applications that might have a large number of them, but it's not too bad. And you can certainly, sorry.
It's not something as general, like say if we created a span for every like reactive hop, I mean, that would be crazy number of spans. Is this a more targeted something different?
Yes, so I guess I should clarify that this isn't creating a span on every use of completion stage or anything like that. This is purely because what we do with Quarkus is we kind of allow you to create methods that can be used as part of a reactive stream, but done in a declarative way to help those who are more familiar with the Java EE and Spring programming models to implement reactive streams. So it's basically at each of those that we're automatically creating spans for producing the messages that might go into that in-memory channel and then receiving them in the channel as well. I don't think the expectation is that those methods would be very small. So sometimes they are reasonable execution time as well. It's more to get, I guess you could equate it to creating spans when you call other methods directly with synchronous code, that you're wanting that internal view of the execution path.
Got it. That makes sense.
And I kind of, sorry, go ahead. And just a quick question. It seems it's opt-in, right? So you install the package, or you enable it, or you don't? Or is it the default what we have with OpenTelemetry agent in Java?
I don't think there's anything in the current Java telemetry agent. I've done this within our reactive libraries that interact with Quarkus and the OTel agent.
I see. So users who use this libraries, they would have spans without need to opt out.
Yeah, so by default it's enabled, but they can disable the tracing aspect as well if they choose.
Oh, okay.
Do those channels have names? Like, is that like a global, like you set up a name for each one of those and they're sort of global?
Yes, they're all within a single application. They're all unique channel names.
Got it. I mean, it sounds like messaging. Sounds very similar. I think from the, I wouldn't necessarily want to have those on by default. Just from from our particular customer base, because they are very, since we charge by ingestion, they're very always concerned about additional spans. But it would be also nice to have if there was a way to propagate. Well, I guess if we had a way to, if we suppress those spans, but we still propagated context, that would be. And I think we're in the Tuesdays meeting. Ludmila was talking about some thoughts about being able to suppress spans conditionally, but we would still, I think we would still propagate context there in those messages. So that would be great if we could get that.
Yeah, I think that if there's going to be the ability to suppress a span, you definitely want the context propagated, because there could be situations where you have an application that has a bunch of phases, you have a incoming or consuming side from somewhere externally, do a bunch of stuff internally, and then send something out, another message out, and you don't want to lose that connection between, even if you're not showing the spans inside.
Yeah.
And sorry. I'm kind of curious if what those messages are. So I assume with reactive programming, we can use the project director context to propagate things. But the messages, it's just the object, right? We have no means of putting anything into them.
Possibly for some, but with Quarkus we do, because we define metadata in addition to the payload that maps onto like Kafka record headers or AMQP headers or whatever it might be if you're dealing with external, and internally it's just a Java object.
Nice. This is cool.
That could be a good, helpful addition to the definition of what memoryQ here means. Is I think those 2 points about they have names, they're sort of real queue named queues, and that the messages that you can attach headers to the messages.
Yeah.
Yeah, so maybe we can if maybe you can summarize what are the things that would be useful, maybe the attributes, just briefly without naming, maybe just document what you've done, how it works. It would really help. And I think that these two specs share a lot in common, at least the relationships between spans for sure. And having them be the same thing would be useful. Then I guess once we get to like formal spec, I would argue for the separation of this description. So we just like let people know what they should rate, not everything. And this is the formatting basically question.
Okay, I'll add something to I think the comment in that OTEP I added about it, so it can flesh it out some more.
Awesome. Okay. So the last thing is the settlement, optional settlement. I'm sorry, I'm not familiar with the discussion here. Is anyone here who was part of it?
Yeah,
Oh.
I was. I hope my internet is stable enough. If you can't hear me, then I'm sorry, and we can
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so I was just reviewing the OTEP, and so, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sorry. Can you hear me? Yeah. Yeah. So there was talk about the settlement part, and in real world, the settlement, like there's not always settlement. Like for example, some systems, once they deliver the message, it's considered settled, and other systems they just do like a pub sub. So when you send a message, it's being broadcast to whoever listens. But if nobody listens, then there's like the settlement happens internally within the broker or within the intermediator. So I was just writing a comment about it. But I think the interesting issue is whether we should create a span for the settlement or whether the settlement should be part of the processing span or the receive span. Because I think it's not very clear. Sometimes you, like the user has to specifically says, I want to settle this message. And then I think it can be beneficial to have a span saying this message is settled, but sometimes it happens automatically by the library or by the protocol. And then it's another issue. And I just want to discuss and hear your opinion about settlement and creating a span for it.
So I think if the settlement for this system is optional, we are not going to create the span either way, right? So there is probably no API, no nothing. And since, like for the first part of your question, right? So for the systems with optional settlement.
Yeah.
Is there any problem with just this part? Okay, no settlement, no span.
Of what? What was the last one?
If there is no settlement operation for the system, there will be no settlement span created. Is there any controversy here?
So I think like some processing backends for traces, they need to have I think some flows can contain a settlement and some will not contain a settlement. So I think it's something worth mentioning in the spec. So it's obvious to people that it's optional, that they can either expect it or not expect it. And also it can be beneficial for implementation libraries to document if they, like how they handle settlement. If they create a span for settlement, if the settlement phase is part of the processing span, if there is no settlement, it can make life a lot easier for people who try to use the traces downstream. And I'm saying it as someone who tried to create a generic processing of messaging system traces. And understanding all the various situations that could occur. So it can make life a lot easier for other people to document this issue.
Yeah, agree. And to your second questions for systems that do have settlement, I think about, like, let's say the case where users explicitly call settlement. They want to know if they called it, right? So if their application works correctly and that they settled the right one, maybe, if it's per message. Then if they forgot it, or maybe if they threw an exception before that then they called the wrong settlement method, or they would want to know. And then settlement is an remote procedure call usually, right? So if it does not complete, or if it never reaches the destination, they would want to know that it wasn't settled because of the network issue. And for the magical things like that, let's say the handler pattern, we have this in our SDKs. When we receive a message, we do everything in the SDK and we just pass it to user. And if user throws an exception, we know, okay, this message should be reprocessed, right? Even then, there are some configurations. For example, we abandon message, or we put it to the dead letter queue, and it depends on the number of times we processed it and the user configuration. So I think as a SDK, we want to provide this visibility, what really happens beyond this handler. So your message, it's still your message, even though that you didn't write the code to settle it. It was attempted 3 times and then put to the dead letter queue and go there and check. And what happens, the stage of this message, it's part of the settlement call. So we should tell users that.
Yeah. So currently,
Oops.
I'm sorry, my internet went down.
Amir, did you hear my long speech? Do you have anything you don't agree or want to challenge?
I'm very sorry, I started hearing it and then my internet had issues again. So I think it might be best if we discuss it next week, where I can hear you properly and you can hear me properly. Again, apologies for my technical issues.
Yeah, no worries. I will try to document it and just will put in the meeting notes.
Okay.
Cool. Then we have just 5 minutes left. And if now nobody has anything else, then thank you.
Thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Well.
Thank you.
Nice day.